So, as I mentioned, I am so thrilled to have our guest on this episode, which is for September Healthy Aging Month, and it's just perfect. And so, we welcome Wayne Lehrer, who is many, many things, but the author of a book that just came out called The Art of Conscious Aging. Wayne, welcome to Caregiving Club on Air.
Thank you so much, Sherri. It's great to be here with you.
Well, it's so great to have you on, and I know we have this mutual connection through USC, so, fight on, Trojans. We have to stick together and support each other, but you've done so many fantastic things. But the first thing I want to ask is, where are we talking to you from today?
Oh, I'm in Santa Monica, California.
Beautiful Santa Monica, and of course, we're talking in September and it's still gorgeous out. In fact, I think we're headed into probably our hottest month this year, right?
Oh, it's been amazing. I run and walk on the beach every morning, and then I go body surfing 6 days a week. So it doesn't get any better than this. These are the good old days.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, it's hard to beat. I tell people, yeah, I do live in paradise. Sorry. Anyway, let's launch into this because there is so much to talk about in your new book. And I got a chance to read through it, and it's just really fascinating, all the things you kind of touch upon. But as I mentioned, you've had this extraordinarily diverse career path. So you've been a World's Fair and theme park designer, IMAX filmmaker, master yoga and meditation teacher, health advocate, international workshop leader, sculptor, and certainly an author and also a teacher and professor. But about 10 years ago, when you were in your early 60s, you had this epiphany. So tell us what that was all about.
Well, I got depressed. I got depressed and I didn't know what it was. And uh, you know, with all of the spiritual work I'd done and all the self-awareness I had, I just really wasn't in touch. So I went to go see a therapist. I'm 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 in 12-step programs, so I do a lot of introspection, and I've been a meditator almost all my life. And as you mentioned, I teach meditation and yoga, so I've done all of that stuff. I'm pretty self-aware, but this depression really just got to me, and so I went to see a therapist, and a couple months into it, he wasn't really helping me very much, and I had started writing the book because everyone a bunch of 10 years ago, about 2 years before I hit this depression, maybe a year before, I met the dean of the top school of gerontology in the world, the president of AARP, and the number one fitness person for the baby boomers, the woman who invented exercise videos in the 70s. And they're all my best friend, literally my best friends in the world now. I met them all in one weekend. And
Wow.
they all said, "Oh, you should write a book on the subject." So I had started writing it and hadn't really connected my depression to that. And while I'm working with the therapist, and I realized at one point as I'm writing, I realized that the purpose of my book that I didn't know when I started writing it, I just thought I was going to say, this is how you deal with it, diet, and this is how you deal with sleep, and this is how you deal with getting stuck in regrets and resentments, all the things I cover in the book. I didn't realize that the real issue behind the book was making this transition from second act operating system of achieving, acquiring, building, succeeding, competing to the third act operating system, which is totally different. Now, some of those things still come to play, but you're no longer driven by ambition and ego. You have to find a new motor for things that you do, and you're no longer, and your kids are gone, so your identity as a parent has gone, and you may not be at work anymore, or your work may have changed, and so your identity as a earner and a ladder climber, and the my I am my job, and all of a sudden I realized all of those things had dissipated, and I was having an impossible time defining who I was. And so I was in what I call the third act identity crisis.
Which I love, and I think that's something that's so normal, right? I mean, we have these bonus years, if you will, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years
Yeah.
of living longer. And yet the world is still focused around, well, you retire at 62, you play golf for a couple of years, and then you drop dead. And that's just not the truth anymore. And we do have this whole third act. So that was something that I thought was really fascinating in the book. And what I want you to get into, why don't we just jump into that? And then I want to go back to something, but you mentioned the third act. So you talk about life in three acts, which
Yes.
to me is kind of like a play, right?
Yeah.
You've got your opener, your mid, and then your ending. But how are they different? And why is the third act really important? And what should we know about it?
Okay, so first of all, historically, as a species, the third act was a year or two, if any. Most people died still in their second act up until 1900. The third act, in other words, the idea of retirement, which is, the Western version of the third act, which was, 2 to maybe 10 years long for most people. And like you said, it was golf, cruises, Barco lounger, grandchildren, doctor visits. That was the third act. So here we go. The first act, 0 to 20, basically learning, finding out who I am, finding out how the world works. It's the period of dependence. That's the basic overview of the third act. I mean, of the first act. The second act goes from basically 20 to mid 50s, or my estimate, I see almost everybody hit it exactly at 60, but you begin to go into this third act identity crisis somewhere in your 50s. So the second act is as I mentioned, you're building, you're achieving, you're developing ego, you're competing, you're succeeding, you're creating my home, my family, my job. So it's the period of independence. So you go from dependence to independence. And then somewhere along the way, somewhere around 50, you begin some of those things, in other words, your body doesn't work as well. 52, your kids, your mother, let's say you got a master's degree, and right out of that, you had your first kid. And so you never even got to do what your master's degree was. So you became defined as a mother. And your definition, the husband or whoever, you may have two breadwinners. I'm defined as a marketing analyst or a lawyer or whatever it is I do. So it's all about what we do. And all of a sudden, those things start getting taken away. I can't play basketball with my buddies anymore because I'm having knee issues. My kids are gone, so I'm no longer a mother. I've left my work, and I'm no longer whatever I am. So that's the movement from the second act to the third act happens somewhere, like I said, mid 50s to 60 years old. And then the transition takes as long as it does. And many people don't make a successful transition because this is very important. Between the first and second act, we have what's always been called the identity crisis. And the identity crisis is from being dependent to becoming independent. I leave my parents' house, I go away to college, I'm deciding what I eat every day, who I hang out with every day, what are good and bad behaviors that I think are good and bad behaviors instead of my parents, what I want to do. I'm led down a channel at college. Most people don't choose the job they do. It's got to do with what major they can get into and what classes are available. Next thing you know, they've not even made their decisions based upon what makes me happy and what doesn't make me happy, what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. For at least a big percentage of people are just shooting it along into their. So the identity crisis is very short because we're just moved along on this conveyor belt, right? And B, there's tons of role models. You want to be famous? Great. You want to be you want to be you want to make a lot of money? You got Elon Musk, you got Steve Jobs, you want to become a celebrity, you've got, tons of role models. Okay. So that first act identity crisis is pretty smooth. It's a year or two. And, obviously it's what it is. And it's much more challenging now. This whole thing of failure to launch is a whole different thing because now people are moving into a second act that's lost its meaning in its old way. But that's a whole nother conversation. That's not what my book's about. The third act is about collaborating, building community, giving back, being an elder, sharing your gifts and your wisdom, um, creating vehicles for your wisdom, your gifts, and your passions to move into the world in a new way. And to do that, you can't use ambition or ego as the driver anymore because I don't know about you, but ambition doesn't motivate me anymore. I'm not busy building my ego. What you see is what you get at this point, you get a 74-year-old bald-headed Jewish guy who does what he does, right? And I don't need to make any excuses, and I don't need to prove anything. I mean, of course, we all do a little bit, that doesn't completely go away. But so what happens now is I've got no role models. Art Magazine, the number one magazine for retirement, they only post every time they put someone on the cover, they celebrate them for living successful second act principles in their third act. Tom Cruise, 57, still does his own stunts. You
Hmm.
still want to hang out on the wing of an airplane at 60 years old? I don't think so. So no one's celebrating. I mean, few people are celebrating Jimmy Carter, for example, whose third act was way more successful than his second act. People arguably say his presidency didn't get a lot accomplished. I'm not in agreement, but nevertheless, he created Habitat for Humanity.
Right.
Clinton created the Clinton Initiative, did far more in his third act. So, and Oprah has done more in her third act. There are people, but they're not celebrated for that as the most part, and they're not seen as we haven't we haven't organized the principles that represent a successful third act identity.
Right.
So basically, and like you said, we've now got 20 to 50 years. Before you had 2 to 10 years, if you were lucky. Many people died at the peak of their second act. They had a heart attack at
Yeah.
52 years old. I mean, I have so many friends whose fathers died. I think they say 54 or 55 is the number one heart attack year. You're at the peak of your second act.
Right.
So yeah, so that's the breakdown on the third act. And the final thing on the third act is in plays or in books or in movies, the third act is where the hero rises to the occasion and redeems themselves. It's not the end. Yes, of course, the end of the book happens, but it happens after the hero has risen from incredible odds, left all of the bad people behind or beat them in some way or another, and arrived as their true self. In the case of myths like Parsifal finds the Grail Cup and comes back and saves King Arthur. These are all third act things, and they all have to do with taking all the diverse parts of myself that I've spent 60 years researching, developing, investing my time and energy into, directly and indirectly, and out of those fashioning an offering to the world that's my way of giving back.
So there's a couple of things I want to touch on because this is so fascinating to me. First of all, what you're describing is something I kind of talk about in my book and some of the writings that I do, and that is that we look at the end of life as the D words, right? Disease, decay, decline, dementia,
Love that.
depression, death. And how do we turn the D words into the P words? Passion, purpose, play, peak experiences. In a way, it's almost like you've spent your life in the first and second act, the first act figuring it out, the second act being responsible and doing all the things that you've kind of built. And then there's almost like this freedom in the third act. But society still wants to only make us, there's this thing going on in aging right now called super agers.
Yeah.
And the super agers are typically defined as people who are still really physically fit. And like you
Yeah.
said, Tom Cruise, who can still jump out of a plane and all these other things. And so it's really defining us by how long can we hang on to the 20, 30s, and 40s instead
Yeah.
of really celebrating the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So talk a little bit about that and kind of this ageism that we see play out.
Okay. So the way I call it, you call it the P versus D. I call it the re-years. Recreate, reimagine, redesign, reinvent, reincarnate, reborn. Those are all the things you have to do. And the main thing is that I believe that what happens is we get a chance to look back at our life, and this is sort of what my first book was about, which is called The Prodigy Within: The Quest to Discover Your Life's Purpose, for late bloomers and other seekers. And my belief is that we take our natural things that we're passionate about, we take those gifts that we've developed consciously and unconsciously. So I believe that there's a force behind every choice we've made in our life that's, even when the choice looks stupid, was something that we were going to learn that was going to be able to be of value to us later. So we're motivated by our higher self and our lower self in our second act, by our ego and by this need to self-express, or what Maslow calls self-actualize. So a time comes, let me shut this off, sorry about that. A time comes that where it's time to put together our natural things that are important to us, the gifts that we've developed, the various different occupations we've had, and the essence of what we've learned in all of those things, and then what it is that we respond to in the world as the world's need.
Mm.
And we put all of those together, and that's the period of what I believe is the third act identity crisis, which is taking all of what I've been, this whole idea of the caterpillar and the butterfly. What they don't tell you in that story is there's a period of time when the caterpillar's inside the cocoon where it's clear jelly. Did you know that?
Didn't know that.
No,
That's
no,
really
they never talk about it. They say we have this idea that the caterpillar's in there and he's going through all these changes and he's growing wings and stuff. No, the caterpillar completely turns into clear jelly. There's nothing inside in the cocoon but clear jelly, and then out of the clear jelly, the butterfly happens. So I believe for us really to go into our third act, we have to go through a period of sacrifice, self-reflection, identity, re-identifying, finding our identity, redesigning who we are, really looking at what matters to us. And out of that, we then come to the world and we say, oh, I'm going to write a book and do podcasts, or I'm going to talk to aging. Why did I meet those three people in one weekend, and uh, a bunch of my best friends all within a month of each other said, you're the youngest looking blah blah I know. You should write a book on aging. You know about meditation, all this stuff. You've always been on diet, blah blah. And I thought, oh, and that was the perfect place for me then to do that. And the process of doing it actually cooked me the rest of the way, turned me into jelly enough that when I came out the other side, I was free of a lot of the stuff that would keep me stuck in my second act. So I've got chapters in my book called you're not, the life you're living is the story you're telling. If I keep telling a story about all the good old days when I did this and when I did that, there's no room for the good old days to be now.
right.
If I'm carrying resentments towards all of the situations where I failed or where somebody blocked me, where I'm a victim, where the world was against me, then I've got no chance to actually show up as a youthful person with opportunities to learn and grow again.
Right.
So that's it.
No, I love this. And there's something I want to touch upon because I think it's really important. On our podcast here, we talk about obviously things like healthy aging for our own sake and how do we do that? But also we have a lot of family caregivers who listen to this podcast. And when you talked about sacrifice and giving back and finding, kind of your true self and self-identity, I think in some ways, caregiving can be seen sometimes as a burden, but what you just described to me is, can we help caregivers see this is an experience that is going to help you
Yeah.
in your third act? You're going through that jelly phase right now.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
So I think you've hit on something that's very important. There's two elements to this giving back. There's the element in our personal, and we have to balance them. And it's very challenging, especially, for example, if all of a sudden one of our parents that we become a caregiver to is like an Alzheimer patient or somebody who's a shut-in or whatever it is, and they require a lot of our energy, and we may not be able to give back to the world at large during that time. And there's the other side of it where we're saying, what's that magnanimous, um, wise elder thing that I could be giving back to? And finding the balance between those two is its own issue. But I think that what's primary to both of them is that we live in a country where nothing is ever enough, and we are very much uh, rewarded for being selfish
Mm.
or self-centered.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, most people that reach my age have had to, in some way or another, take care of one parent or the other.
Right.
you know, let alone what they may have to have done for their children. But certainly they've learned a certain degree of selflessness along the way that makes them a better human being, that makes them more that those kind of growth things, they don't come from having learned those as a child. I was taught to be kind. Yes, many people, I didn't have those parents. My parents had not read the operating manual for being a good parent.
Right.
I was not graced with, I never knew to say thank you. I never knew to help people who had less than me. These weren't lessons learned at home. So some of them are learned the hard way, by all of a sudden, you know, being stuck with a parent who has no one else but you, if that's the way you perceive it, and being stuck with them then makes so we only grow through rising to the occasion, most of us, to getting called out. So that's the one side of it. The other side of it is I believe deep within all of us, because I think we're basically tribal, beings at our root. We're social beings. We have a desire to benefit the tribe, to benefit our culture, our society. Now, some of us do that and we get very shut down behind it. It's us versus them, the Christians versus the Muslims, the red states versus the blue states. But I believe that there's a higher calling that you only get to when you find that selflessness of saying, what is it that I can make a contribution to in the world, both in my personal world, with my children, like a lot of times I know people burdened with, children that are failed to launch, and their children are 40 or 50 years old and they're still supporting them. Is that the best use of your energy? And does that help your kid at all? These are hard questions to answer, but if you don't at least meet them head on, you're not going to grow as a human, and therefore you're not going to benefit anyone around you, let alone your
Right.
kid or your parent. So I think the bottom line of what I'm saying is that we need the challenges that life brings us, and we also have to ask the question that brings us to those challenging things. Like, as you know, I spent 5 years writing my book, and it's both personal research, scientific research, friend research, self-reflection research. It was a process. The fact that I met that process head on made me be able to write a book that has value to everybody instead of just being, good information.
Yeah.
And I think that that's go
And I
ahead.
love that I love that part of your book, the way that you formatted or structured it. You do have your own personal growth and share that, but you have the other stories too, which are really insightful. Um, and there was something so personal growth, I think you're right. And I think we need to support caregivers in saying you're going through a personal growth experience, embrace it.
Yeah.
This is something that will be good to you on the other side, as you come through this kind of journey that might seem really challenging. There was a chapter I was fascinated by, and it was called You Are Not Your Story. Now, in our world today, we're told that storytelling is essential. It's really important. We all have to tell our stories. But you just were touching upon, but our stories shouldn't be all about the past. So talk a little bit about how can people embrace their story in the right way.
Um, it's so important. You cannot get on with your life. I mean, we all know elderly people or old people. I mean, many of the people that we call old are people that every time you see them, they tell you about, back when I was working at so and so, or when I could do that, or when I won that thing, or when they all live for those peak experience moments where they climb to the top of the mountain, or when the world completely crashed down on them, and they become that story, and that's all there's room for. And I think for us to be able to get on with our life, we have to be able to, I hit my 60s, and I was so burdened with the regret, one primary regret. I had reached the top of the world in terms of designing, and I had designed 6 pavilions for One World's Fair in South Korea. And I also then made a 3D IMAX film that I was the producer director of. that was voted best exhibit at the World's Fair. And 1 week before the World's Fair happened, I was sent home because the owners of the company didn't want to share the stage with me. And it shattered me. And it shattered me enough that even though I did still other good project, I did this big I did the first computer generated children's show on TV. I did other great things. There was something in me broken by that, and that became a regret that paralyzed me in so many ways. And it wasn't until I finally said to myself, "Wait a second, I did this amazing thing." The fact that the world, the fact that daddy and mommy didn't pat me on the back for it, the fact that it didn't turn into a bigger and better, more money opportunity, that had nothing to do. So when I passed through the process of regret, I was free. And I never thought I'd get another big opportunity again. And I've had many since then. But it was the process of letting go of that primary story in my case. And I think for most of us, it's multiple stories of the identity of the things that happened to me good and the things that happened bad, rather than this idea that, hey, I show up and go to the beach every morning and run and jump in the ocean. That's as good as it gets.
Right. It is.
People all over the world want to be able to do that. And I'm like going to judge it by this other thing that isn't happening as fast as I wanted to, or as big as I wanted to, or as worldwide as I wanted to. That's just a way. So that's the main problem with story and so we have to learn to tell a new story. And the only way to do that is say, who do I want? So this brings us back to the second act to third act thing. I think a lot of people get to their third act and they ask themselves, have I created anything of real value?
Mm.
That's a big question that many people actually are forced to confront. I'm going to die soon. So they face their mortality. So the old stories don't have anything to do with where I'm going.
Right.
Right? And if I hold on to them, I'm dying quicker. Because
Right.
what youth is described as is doing new things, challenging ourselves, stepping out of our comfort zones. Those are all things that that people we call old, don't do. And the people we think of as, oh, they're still so young. There are people that have gone back, they're going back to school, they're starting new businesses, they've written a book and they're out there promoting it out of the back of their car, whatever it is. So that's the writing of a new story. In the third act, one of the things as a writer, I'm writing a novel now. If you know how the book ends at the beginning, the reader's probably going to know too.
Mm. Okay.
It's pretty, it's going to be obvious along the way. And
Right.
the best books and the best stories, whether it's Shakespeare or Herman Melville or Mark Twain, you don't know what Huck Finn's going to do. You don't
Right.
know what's going to happen to, the whale, you know. So
Right.
so we don't know where we're going to, but everything in our life is taking us to that moment. So if we don't show up with this curiosity, this openness, this willingness, and I can't have any of those things if I'm locked into the story of what was and the story of how I think it's all going to turn out now. In other words, it's downhill from here. I got to take all these pills. The story I'm telling what happens to most people you call old? What do they talk about? Politics, sports, their grandchildren, and their doctor visits and their
Their
illness.
health.
And
Yeah.
that's all they talk about. No wonder their lives are small.
Right.
I don't
Right.
hang out. I set the tone of all my relationships now by talking about this. And if they want to talk about that, I don't spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah. Well, and I love this. So what you're saying is that, we hit that third act. We still have stories to tell. It's not the stories of the past, the stories of the future.
And
What
they're
are those going to
unknown.
be?
They're miraculous. It's up to us to discover them.
Yes. So, September is also self-care month.
Yeah.
And self-care, I've been in this wellness space now for a long time, the family caregiving space for, more than 2 decades, and self-care is all of a sudden getting a backlash, like, you're just indulging and, you're not giving back, you're just focusing on yourself, and, so I wanna just hear your thoughts on healthy aging, self-care, maybe your secrets on how do we take care of ourselves as well as take care of others or or that generativity of giving back. Just talk a little bit about that and what self-care means to you.
Well, I believe that that what the third act has historically means is diminished capacity, right? Historically, that's what the third act. We got to the place where we weren't as good at work anymore. We weren't needed for this anymore. We couldn't earn at the same level anymore. We couldn't compete. So we could put it under this idea of diminishing capacity, right?
Mhm.
And if we judge everything by those old criteria, certainly true. Now, if I've spent a whole lifetime not eating properly, not getting the right sleep, not knowing about exercise, then I'm going to arrive at my third act, and my third act is going to be completely about coping with the diminished capacity things that I'm confronted with, all of the diseases that crop up and all this other stuff. So it behooves us to become very self-centered and very selfish and very self-care oriented if we want to be alive to make a contribution. And like anybody, if I'm going to the Olympics and my guy says you can't have sex if you're a boxer 6 weeks before a fight, you got to eat, you got to have six egg whites every morning. You got to do, you don't argue.
Right?
That's what you do if you want to achieve something. So, I know, for example, I need 7 hours of sleep a night. 6.5's okay, but I got to get them before 10 p.m. If I get them after 10, 8.5 are not enough. 10 are not enough. So if I say to you, I want to write a book and I want to make a difference in how people age, and then my actions don't corroborate with that. In other words, wait, if I'm going to not be able to write the next morning because I'm foggy and tired, then clearly I'm not doing what I said I want to do. So it really behooves us in our third act more than any other time. And I talk about this a lot. It was one of the other things I wasn't aware of when I was writing. And that's this idea that we finally have a feedback system. When you're young, you can get away with everything. So there's no feedback system. I have a
Right?
chapter in the book called It's Not Negotiable. My sleep is not negotiable. The fact that I need to eat, I need to stay in ketosis. I need to have a complete anti-inflammatory diet for everything in me to function at the highest level. And frankly, I'm so much happier if everything in me and functions at the highest level. Doing anything short of that is both selfish and self-destructive. And so, which are both opposite of self-care and also opposite of caring for others. If I'm not available at my maximum capacity, if all I'm dealing with is fighting off diminished capacity issues, or diminishing capacity. So I don't spend hardly any time fighting off diminishing capacity. If I can't run anymore, then I walk on the beach. I don't say, God, it's horrible, I can't run anymore. Okay, well then I hike in the mountains and I get to do it with a friend. And I get to do it in nature. And all of a sudden there's all these benefits because I hate going to the gym.
Right?
I don't have to be in a stuffy place. Now, other people don't hate it. To them, it's feeding, but I need, so there's all these upsides to self-care that make me not only healthier for things, but make me happier so that when I show up to do that stuff for other people, I'm a freaking rock star in terms of it, in terms of I show up happy. I show up energetic. It's so rare I complain about anything because that's not part of my headset anymore because I'm doing everything I can. And you get to a place in life, and this is a big issue in the West, we are in a culture where nothing is ever enough. When you get to your third act, if you're going to have a good third act, you got to go, hey, this is it. This is who I am. I'm going to take the best care of it I can, and I'm going to accept the things I cannot do anymore. In the 12-step world, there's a serenity prayer, accept the things I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? That's being healthy. So, yes, self-care is critical to me showing up at my maximum level, in my maximum emotional state, with my maximum level of mental clarity at this age,
Right?
and spiritually fit. And if I'm
Yeah.
not doing that, I'm not a value to anybody.
Well, and that's what I love because your book, and I'm such a student of this, is it's multifaceted. It's not, it's the physical, it's the mental, it's the emotional, it's the spiritual. There's so many different elements that come together to give you kind of that optimal aging. We've got just about a minute left. Any last thoughts for our audience, just in terms, and by the way, the art of conscious aging, I love, the art piece of it, that it is an art form to really to do this right. But any last thoughts? And then what we'll do is, if we get cut off, I'll make sure the audience knows where to find you and your book.
Okay,
But
great.
tell us quickly, last thoughts.
I just think that, we're at an age where we get really good feedback if we're willing to accept it. If I can't do something and it doesn't work, I can either be upset about that or I can say, what can I do? And this adaptability, this thing, what I call the re-years, reimagine, recreate, redesign, reinvent, re-embody, reincarnate. There's so much chance to find myself as this person in this next phase of life that's radically different. And you just give yourself permission to let the old part of yourself just move into a secondary spot and let this new part emerge and give it the opportunity, give it the health it requires, the sleep it requires, the friends it desires. Dump the people that are holding you back, that are lead weights. Walk away from things that no longer serve you. Live within the conceptual framework that you get a whole new life in front of you. Something you didn't necessarily plan for, direction you didn't necessarily see coming, opportunities that are beyond your wildest dreams. Um, that instead of you're on like this long downhill slide towards oblivion, in medicine they call it the period of critical demise. And in the 1900s it was about 1/3 of 1% of your life expectancy, which was 2 to 3 months. You got pneumonia and you died. Now it's 6%. It's about 6 to 8 years for most people of critical demise. So instead of this idea that it's this long downhill slope, that there's a whole new world available to you. And when you look around and you see the people that are elders that are happy, they're the people that have embraced that idea that, hey, and you'll hear people say, I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know, and I see you're doing the same. This is the best it's ever been. Yeah, there's a lot of things I can't do, but I am happier with myself. I am happier with my surroundings. I'm happier with how I spend my days. I don't have a single person in my life that I meet with on a regular basis that I don't like.
Yeah.
I don't have anyone in my life that I complain about. Oh my God, what would life be without having people to complain about? Even family, you grow to accept them all. So stepping out of this idea that that really limits our life when we're younger, of that there's never enough, not enough time, not enough money, not enough people, not enough opportunities, not enough acknowledgement, to this place like, hey, it is what it is. It's
Right.
working just fine. It's not broken. And I have all these possibilities. 5 years ago, just before COVID happened, I didn't plan on this. I was leading workshops in China. 100 people came to a workshop called Authentic Happiness. You know how important teaching authentic happiness was in China? I mean, these people's lives were radically changed from one 3-day workshop weekend. That rippled through the culture. I don't know how, but I know because of what changed in that room. I never planned on going to China to do that. It
Right.
wasn't on the wish list. It wasn't on my vision board. So I think everything's possible, and I think that's the main thing people need to know as they approach their third act. Don't limit it by what it should be, what it isn't, and what hasn't happened yet. And open yourself to this idea that the best is, I have a byline in my thing, which is the rest of your life, the best of your life. Why not?
Yeah.
Yes, there's going to be things you can't do, but there's going to be a whole slew of things that you do that are better.
Well, and I love, your accept and then adapt, right?
Yeah.
So you're not accepting defeat, you're pivoting. You're like, "Okay, here's how it is now, and I'm gonna have to go this way with it." You mentioned, and since we have a couple more minutes here, um, you mentioned authentic happiness, and I know that's a part of your book too, and I think that's something that is so important to people. We are in the pursuit of happiness. What does it really mean? Tell us to you, what is authentic happiness?
So I break it down into a few things, and it's partly based upon positive psychology and partly based on my own interpretation of that. So the lowest form of happiness is called pleasures and pleasantries. Eating a good meal, having a nice conversation. The next level is basically flow, is getting into this state. The next level of happiness is flow, where you get lost in time and you're doing something that really brings you great pleasure. The next level is collaboration, is deep community connection, intimacy with others. And the highest level is values, and making a contribution. In other words, being a benign force in the world. And so as we age, many people get stuck where the only thing that makes them happy when they're older is the pleasures and pleasantries. So they all become foodies or golf addicts or whatever it is. And that's really just such a limited piece of the puzzle. Flow, I mean, I took up sculpting at 50. I'm an incredible sculptor. Who knew? I started
Right,
carving stone. This is
right.
that there's one of
Ah,
my carvings, right? Can you see it?
gorgeous. Yes,
Right.
it's gorgeous.
So, I didn't know that at 30 or 40. Um,
Right,
when I did that, 8 hours can go by like that, right? That's the
right.
flow state. Intimacy, the kinds of relationships you can have after you're no longer bound to this person at work, or you have to be nice to your kids or your parents or, or relatives, or, when you're really exploring. And intimacy changes so much in the third act because it's no longer romantic intimacy as much as deep soul connection, sharing a common vision. And then, of course, the highest form, which Maslow talks about in the hierarchy of needs, is self actualization, where we put all the parts of ourselves together and we make a contribution. And nothing feels better than doing that. So, the authentic happiness in our third act is flow states, better connection to community, and giving back.
I love that. And I think that's a great way for us to wrap this up. But I want our audience to know there is so much in your book that is so meaningful and that you can really glean. What I love about it is you give us so much good information, and it's, as you said, your personal story, other people's personal stories, but you allow the reader to interpret it and create their own, you know, prescription. So it's
Thank
not a
you.
book that says, do this and you will get this. It's more about think about it this way and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think that for me, it was really important. And for example, one of the areas in the book that could normally be prescriptive is diet, right? I had to really ask myself, I know a lot about food, right? But I had to really ask myself, what's the important element? And basically, the only thing you really need to know about diet is if the only cause of real problems when you're older is, are you in an inflamed state or not? So you have to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. Now, that can be vegan, can be keto, it could be carnivore, it could be any of the diets that are out there, but you need to know that inflammation is the cause of cancer, Alzheimer's, every form of thing are a state of prolonged disease that poisoned an organ or a body part. That's what causes all of those things. Prolonged disease. And that disease is commonly referred to in medicine as an inflamed state.
Yeah.
So I talk about that, and then I give you examples of. So I do that with everything in the book, and thank you for acknowledging it because it was a big decision all the way through. Which is, look at this is the price you're going to pay for. One of the things I talk about is what's the price of admission for every action when you're older. If you ask yourself that thing when you're going to have one more dessert, or you're going to have to, is it really worth staying up that late when I really want to do this tomorrow morning? Those are questions that you can ask as an adult because you're not driven by your ego, your desire to get famous or to have sex or whatever it is that's going to drive you otherwise. And you can say, what's the price of admission for this thing? So I think in every one of those things, I give people, I sort of like flesh it out. So I call my book the operating manual for the third act.
I love
Follow,
that.
make your own decisions about these things. How much or how little is up to you. And the choice is enjoy, be happy, experience deep, profound satisfaction, or struggle, suffer, and you know, start critical demise. Pretty
Yeah.
easy choice for me.
Yeah. Well, Wayne, we could talk to you all day. We could do a whole nother hour on all the great things in your book, but
Next
I want to
time.
just thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing your insights and tell our audience where can they find, first of all, where can they find your latest book, The Art of Conscious Aging, and then where can they find out more information about you?
They can find my latest book on my bookshelf or on Amazon.
Okay.
And it's on Amazon. It's called The Art of Conscious Aging, Wayne Lehrer. But it's easily get there. I also wrote a previous book. If you're looking to really find your life's purpose in later life, it's called The Prodigy Within. That's also available on Amazon. And there's a workbook that comes with this that you can also purchase, or you can download a free PDF of it if you buy the book. And then my website is waynelehrer.com, WayneLehrer. And if you go there, if you have specific questions, I offer a free 20 to 30-minute discovery call because I do coaching with people who are having challenges in their third act or finding ways to manifest who they are in their third act. So you can come on and do a free session with me. If it turns into coaching, great. If not, we can certainly deal with a issue in a very profound way. And then there's also you can sign up. I send out fortune cookies twice a week, and the fortune cookies are 299 words, sort of third act issues. So, one of them's called, they have different titles. One is, the life you're living, the story you're telling is the life you're living, or these are the good old days, you know, and then I'll say, three paragraphs on that. And I send those out twice a week through my
I
newsletter.
love that. Oh, I love that. Well, we're going to have those links on our episode guide page.
Great.
So, again, Wayne, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was just a thrill.
Oh, it was such an honor. It's so great sharing this with you. Thank you so much. Thanks for such thoughtful questions too. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we try.
You're doing a great
Anyway,
job. You're doing a great service too.
well, thank you. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.